Welcome, dear listeners, to the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, where the snow falls softly and secrets hide in every corner. I'm your guide through Miss Marple and the snow-covered crime, a cozy tale of mystery and mischief in the style of Agatha Christie. Settle in with a cup of tea and let's begin our journey with the inimitable Miss Jane Marple. Music swells and fades. Chapter 1. The Fate and the Footprints. The village of St. Mary Mead lay under a thick, unbroken quilt of snow on the evening of December 20th, 1947. It was the sort of snow that muffled the world. No hoofbeats on the lane, no creak of cartwheels. Only the soft hush of flakes settling on thatched roofs and the occasional puff of smoke from chimneys curling lazily into the violet sky. The war was 2 years past, rationing still pinched, but Christmas spirit, stubborn, indomitable, had taken root in the village hall. The hall itself was a sturdy red brick affair built in 1892 to commemorate Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. Ivy clung to its walls like old lace now dusted white. Inside, fairy lights, salvaged from pre-war decorations, twinkled along the rafters. Long trestle tables groaned under the weight of mince pies, Victoria sponges, and jars of chutney labeled in Mrs. Bantry's meticulous copperplate. A gramophone in the corner played a scratchy recording of In the Bleak Midwinter, and children darted between legs, clutching paper chains. At the heart of the hall stood the display case, a mahogany and glass cabinet on loan from Gossington Hall, polished until it gleamed like a dark mirror. Inside, on a cushion of midnight blue velvet, rested the pride of St. Mary Mead, an antique locket the size of a walnut, its ruby heart winking beneath the fairy lights. Legend claimed it held a single curl of Queen Victoria's hair, snipped during a royal visit in 1862. Whether true or not, the locket had belonged to the late Lady Ashford and was now the star attraction of the Christmas fete. A discreet placard read, "Proceeds to repair St. Mary's church roof. 500 needed." Presiding over this small empire of jam and jewelry was Mrs. Clarissa Bantry, 52, formidable and fond of tweed. Her hat, a burgundy felt creation with a single pheasant feather, bobbed as she issued orders. "Evelyn, dear, the raffle tickets are crooked. Straighten them, please. And Tommy Briggs, stop swinging on the maypole ribbon." Young Tommy Briggs, 14, freckled and perpetually guilty-looking, released the ribbon with a grin and darted toward the sweet stall. In a quiet corner near the fireplace, Miss Jane Marple sat knitting. She was a slight figure in dove-gray wool, her silver hair pinned beneath a lace cap. A pair of steel-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose, and her pale blue eyes, sharp as a robin's, moved steadily over the room. Her needles clicked in a soothing rhythm. Click, 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 click. To the casual observer, she was merely an old lady making a scarf. To those who knew her, she was cataloging every gesture, every glance, every half-heard whisper. Miss Marple had come to the fete at Mrs. Bantry's insistence. "We need someone sensible to keep an eye on the silver spoons, Jane." But she had her own reasons. She enjoyed people, and people, she often reflected, were so very revealing when they thought no one was watching. Near the mulled wine cauldron stood Dr. Haydock, the village physician, a tall man with a neat mustache and a tendency to jollity that sometimes rang hollow. He ladled steaming wine into enamel mugs, adding a dash of something from a small brown bottle. "Rowan berry syrup, my own recipe. Gives it a proper kick. None of your wishy-washy cloves here." Miss Evelyn Price, the librarian, hovered nearby. She was 40ish, thin, with a nervous habit of pushing her spectacles up her nose. Her eyes kept drifting to the locket. Such provenance, such craftsmanship. At the far end of the hall, Mr. Reginald Swan, new to the village, loud and fond of check waistcoats, boomed to anyone who would listen. I'd have paid 500 guineas for that bauble in London. Mark my words, it's worth twice that to the right collector. The clock above the stage, a large, solemn-faced thing, struck 6. Outside, the snow had begun to fall more thickly, swirling past the frosted windows in lazy spirals. Inside, the fete was at its peak. Children queued for lucky dip, ladies compared knitting patterns, and the vicar attempted to start a carol only to be drowned out by the gramophone. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. 5 minutes until the grand raffle, tickets 1 shilling, proceeds to the church roof. She bustled to the display case, produced a small brass key from her handbag, and turned it in the lock with a satisfying click. The glass door opened smoothly. She adjusted the velvet cushion, ensuring the locket sat perfectly centered, then locked the case again. There, safe as houses, though I shan't relax until it's back at Gossington Hall tomorrow. Miss Marple smiled serenely. Locks are only as strong as the hands that turn them, Clarissa. At 6:15 precisely, the lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. A collective ooh rose from the children. The gramophone gave a final wheeze and fell silent. And then came the scream. It was high, sharp, and unmistakably terrified. Every head turned. Young Tommy Briggs stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting on his lashes, his face the color of skim milk. There's a body in the snowdrift by the old oak. I saw it when I went to fetch more coal. For a moment the hall froze. Then chaos erupted. Coats were seized, scarves wound, boots stamped. Mrs. Bantry's voice cut through the din. Stay calm. Dr. Haydock with me. The rest of you, stay inside. But villagers surged outward like a tide. Miss Marple rose slowly, tucked her knitting into her bag, and followed at a measured pace. Her boots, sturdy, sensible lace-ups, crunched through the fresh snow. The old oak stood at the edge of the churchyard, its branches heavy with snow. Beneath it, a drift had formed a natural hollow. And there, half-buried, lay Mr. Harold Finch, the village jeweler. He was on his back, one arm flung out as if in greeting. His spectacles glinted in the lantern light. His face was calm, almost serene, but his lips were an unnatural shade of blue. Snow had begun to dust his eyelashes. Dr. Haydock knelt, brushing snow from the man's coat. Dead. An hour, perhaps less. No sign of violence, but this coloring. He pressed 2 fingers to Mr. Finch's neck, then shook his head. Inspector Craddock, summoned by a frantic telephone call, arrived minutes later, his police Austin skidding toker in the snow. He was young, earnest, and already out of his depth. Right. No one touches the body. Constable, cordon the area. Miss Marple had already begun her own survey. She stood a little apart, her gloved hands clasped, eyes moving methodically. First, the footprints. A single set led from the village hall door to the oak, deep, deliberate impressions made by a man's boot, size 10 or 11. They began at the hall's side entrance and ended at the body. But, and this was what made Miss Marple's brow crease, there were no return prints. The snow around the oak was otherwise untouched. Whoever had walked here had not walked back. Second, the display case. Mrs. Bantry, white-faced, had returned to the hall and discovered the glass shattered. The locket was gone. The brass key still hung in the lock, inside the case. I locked it myself at 6 o'clock. How could anyone? Third, the mulled wine. An enamel mug lay overturned near Mr. Finch's outstretched hand. A dark stain had frozen into the snow, wine spiced with a faint crimson tint. Miss Marple knelt, careful not to disturb the prince, and touched a finger to the stain. She brought it to her nose. Cinnamon, cloves, orange peel, and beneath it something sharp, almost metallic. Rowan berries, in quantity most unpleasant. She straightened, her gaze drifting to the hall's side door. It opened onto a narrow alley used for coal deliveries. A coal scuttle stood just inside, its lid askew. Tommy Briggs's footprints, smaller, lighter, led from the scuttle to the alley and back. But the deeper prints began beside the scuttle, as if someone had waited there, hidden. Dr. Haydock joined her, his breath clouding in the cold. Poison, I'd wager. Cyanide-like symptoms, but slower. Rowan extract, perhaps. Concentrated. Deadly in the right dose. And the locket? Stolen to muddy the waters, I shouldn't wonder. Poor Finch had enemies. Owed money, kept secrets. Miss Marple's eyes returned to the footprints. She took 3 steps backward, mimicking the stride. The snow was soft. Her own prints were shallow. The killers were deep, as if carrying weight, or wearing boots too large. Behind them, the village hall windows glowed warm against the night. Inside, the fate continued in shocked whispers. Outside, the snow fell thicker, already beginning to erase the edges of the prints. Miss Marple pulled her shawl tighter. Inspector Craddock will need cocoa, and I shall need my knitting. This may take some time. Chapter 2. The suspects gather. The morning after the Christmas fete dawned pale and still, the snow having ceased some time before first light. St. Mary Mead lay in a hush so complete that the village seemed to hold its breath. Smoke rose straight from chimneys, and the only movement was the slow drift of icicles melting in the weak winter sun. At the vicarage, a rambling, ivy-covered house with a garden that sloped toward the churchyard, Miss Jane Marple sat in the bow window of the morning room. A small coal fire glowed in the grate, and a tray of tea things rested on the walnut table before her. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, had insisted on a proper breakfast after the shock of the previous night, and the table bore evidence of her kindness: buttered toast triangles, a pot of marmalade, and a plate of scones still warm from the oven. Miss Marple, however, had eyes only for the notebook open on her lap. In her neat, spidery handwriting she had begun a list. The door opened, and Mrs. Clement bustled in, pink-cheeked from the kitchen. "Jane, you'll never guess. Mrs. Bantry is here, and Dr. Haydock, and Miss Price, and that dreadful Mr. Swan. They're all in the drawing-room drinking my best Darjeeling and talking 19 to the dozen." Inspector Craddock telephoned to say he'll be along presently. "Shall I bring more cups?" "If you would be so kind, Letitia, and perhaps a few more scones. People are always more forthcoming when their mouths are occupied." The drawing-room of the vicarage was a long, low-ceilinged space with faded chintz sofas and a grandfather clock that ticked with solemn authority. A portrait of the late Bishop Clement glowered down from above the mantel. The fire had been stoked high, and the 5 principal figures of the previous night's drama were arranged around it like players on a stage. Mrs. Clarissa Bantry sat bolt upright on the largest sofa, her burgundy hat still pinned firmly in place despite the early hour. Her gloved hands clutched a handkerchief, though her eyes were dry and determined. Dr. Haydock stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the snow-covered garden. His mustache drooped slightly, and there were shadows beneath his eyes. Miss Evelyn Price perched on a spindle-legged chair, a leather-bound notebook open on her knee. She was writing furiously, pausing only to push her spectacles up the bridge of her nose. Mr. Reginald Swan had commandeered the vicar's armchair and was helping himself to a second scone with the air of a man who considered hospitality his due. Young Tommy Briggs hovered near the door, half in, half out, as if ready to bolt. His freckles stood out against skin still pale from shock. Mrs. Clement entered with a fresh tray, and the room fell momentarily silent as cups were filled. Miss Marple followed, settling into a corner chair with the unobtrusive grace of a cat. "It's a disgrace. That's what it is. Poor Mr. Finch, murdered, and the locket stolen from under our very noses. The church roof will never be mended now. I locked that case myself at 6 o'clock. Locked it." She emphasized the word as if volume might restore the locket to its velvet cushion. "Poison beyond doubt. I've sent samples to the county lab, but the symptoms were unmistakable. Cyanide-like, but slower. Rowan berries concentrated, a cruel way to go. Mr. Finch was careless. That locket should have been in the British Museum, not displayed like a prize pig at a fair. Careless? The man was a fool. I offered him £300 for it last Michaelmas, and he laughed in my face. Said it was village heritage. Heritage doesn't pay debts, does it?" He brushed crumbs from his waistcoat with a meaty hand. "I only went for coal, like Mrs. Bantry said. I never touched the locket, honest." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes moving from face to face. "Tommy, dear, you had coal dust on your sleeves last night, and something else. A red stain here." She touched her own cuff, and Tommy flushed scarlet. "That was just berry juice, from the mulled wine. I spilled some when I was helping Dr. Haydock." "You were not helping me, boy. You were skulking near the cauldron as usual." Miss Marple noted the doctor's tone, too sharp, too quick. She also noted the smear of red on Tommy's sleeve, now dried to a rust brown. Rowan berries, yes, but not from the cauldron. The mulled wine had been a deep crimson. This stain was brighter, almost scarlet. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward. "Nervous? He should be nervous. I found a silver spoon in his pocket not an hour ago, my spoon from the fete. The boy's light-fingered always has been. That was a mistake. I was going to give it back." Mr. Finch kept records, meticulous records. If the locket was stolen to order, there'll be a paper trail. I've seen his ledgers. He catalogued every piece he ever handled. She closed her notebook with a snap. "Ledgers, eh? Then let's see them. I'll wager my new Bentley there's a name in there worth following." The grandfather clock struck 10, its chimes echoing through the room. Outside, a police Austin crunched to a halt on the gravel. Inspector Craddock entered, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. He was young, earnest, and clearly overwhelmed. "Good morning. I've come from the hall. The display case, locks intact, but the glass was smashed from the inside. Whoever took the locket was inside the case when Mrs. Bantry locked it at 6. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Inside, but that's impossible. I saw the case was empty before I locked it." "Empty to the eye, perhaps, but not to the ear." Did anyone hear a sound after the lock clicked? A rustle? A breath? Silence. Then Miss Price spoke almost reluctantly. I thought I heard something, like fabric brushing glass, but the gramophone was playing and I thought it was the children. And the footprints? They begin at the side door and end at the body. No one saw anyone leave the hall after 6. Exactly. Which means our thief either flew or hid inside the hall until the coast was clear. Miss Marple set her cup down with a soft clink, or walked out backward in boots too large to create the illusion of a single set of prints. A clever misdirection. But misdirection for what purpose? The locket? Or Mr. Finch himself? She opened her notebook and added a new line. Killer hid in hall after 6 p.m. Motive unclear. Backward, in this snow? Ridiculous, the boy did it. Tommy's always pinching things. Probably sold the locket to some London fence by now. I was in the coal alley, that's all. Enough! Inspector, you must search the boy's house. And Dr. Haydock, those berries. You supplied them. How concentrated was the syrup? Perfectly safe in the quantities used. A dash for flavor, nothing more. I keep a small vial of concentrate in my surgery for medicinal purposes. Medicinal rowan extract? How unusual. Most doctors prefer digitalis or arsenic for heart complaints. The doctor flushed. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the window. Beyond the garden, the churchyard was a study in white and gray. The old oak stood sentinel, its branches heavy with snow. Beneath it, the police had erected a small tent over Mr. Finch's body. A constable stood guard, stamping his feet against the cold. She noticed something else. A faint smudge of red on the windowsill just below the latch. Berry juice, perhaps, carried on a glove. The window opened onto the side path, the same path that led to the coal alley. Someone came this way, after the fate, after the murder. The inspector cleared his throat. I'll need statements from everyone who was near the display case after 5:30. And Mrs. Bantry, your key. May I see it? Mrs. Bantry produced the brass key from her handbag. It was warm from her grip. No scratches, but the lock inside the case was picked, or opened with a duplicate. We'll need to check Mr. Finch's workshop. Mr. Finch made duplicates. For insurance purposes, he kept them in a tin box under his counter. Miss Marple closed her notebook. The room was warm, the tea fragrant. But beneath the civility, tension crackled like the fire in the grate. 5 suspects, 5 motives, perhaps. And one clue that tied them all, the rowan berry. Thank you, Letitia, for your hospitality. I believe I'll take a turn in the garden. The air clears the mind. She slipped on her coat and stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath her boots and the cold bit at her cheeks. She followed the side path to the coal alley, where Tommy's small prints were still visible, overlaid by larger, deeper ones. At the alley's end, she found what she was looking for, a single rowan berry bright as a drop of blood against the white. Not from the cauldron, from a pocket or a vial. She wrapped the berry in her handkerchief and tucked it into her pocket. Chapter 3. Clues in the Snow. By noon on the second day, St. Mary Mead had settled into the uneasy quiet that follows tragedy. The snow had started again, lighter now, drifting like sifted sugar across the lanes. The village hall stood cordoned off with police tape, its windows dark except for the flicker of Constable Polk's lantern inside. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a charcoal coat and a knitted scarf the color of damson jam, approached the hall with the measured gait of someone who had nowhere urgent to be and everywhere to observe. Her boots left neat, shallow prints beside the deeper, chaotic tracks of policemen and curious villagers. At the side entrance, the coal alley, she paused. Tommy Briggs's small footprints were already half filled by fresh snow, but the larger set, the ones that led to the oak tree, remained stark. Miss Marple knelt, her gloved fingers brushing the edge of one impression. Size 10, perhaps 11, heavy tread, yet the stride is careful, almost rehearsed. She straightened and entered the hall. Inside, the fate's gaiety had vanished. Tables were pushed against walls, fairy lights unplugged, mince pies cleared away. Only the display case remained, its glass front a spiderweb of cracks radiating from a single point. Constable Polk swept shards into a dustpan, his face grim. "Miss Marple, you shouldn't be in here, ma'am. Inspector's orders." "I'm sure the inspector won't mind an old lady satisfying her curiosity. Tell me, Constable, did you find anything inside the case besides glass?" "A scrap of velvet torn from the cushion. And this." He produced a small evidence bag. Inside lay a single brass screw, no longer than a matchstick. "From the lock mechanism?" "No, ma'am. The lock's intact. This came from the hinge. Someone loosened it, deliberately." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. She took the bag, holding it to the light. "So the thief didn't smash the glass to enter. They opened the case from within, then staged the breakage. Clever." At the far end of the hall, the mulled wine cauldron had been removed for analysis, but the trestle table remained. A faint ring of crimson stained the wood where Mr. Finch's mug had sat. Miss Marple leaned close, inhaling. Cinnamon, orange peel, cloves, and beneath it that sharp metallic tang. She opened her handbag and withdrew the rowan berry from the previous day, still wrapped in her handkerchief. Holding it beside the stain, she compared the hues. Identical, not from the cauldron's syrup. This came from a concentrated source. She slipped the berry back and moved to the side door. The coal scuttle stood just inside, lid askew. A faint smear of red marred its rim. Dried now, but unmistakable. Outside again, Miss Marple followed the alley to its junction with the main lane. Here the larger footprints veered toward the pub, the Blue Boar. She paused at the pub's side entrance, noting a fresh set of prints, smaller, lighter, leading in. Inside the Blue Boar, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the murmur of midday drinkers. Mr. Reginald Swan held court at the bar, a pint in one hand, a pipe in the other. "Finch was a stubborn fool. I'd have paid a king's ransom for that locket. Now it's gone, and good riddance to bad rubbish." Farmer Giles, nursing a half-pint, muttered, "Debts, that's what did for him. Owed money to half the county." Miss Marple took a seat near the fire, ordering a small sherry. Her ears pricked at a conversation in the snug. "Can't be traced. The vial was nearly empty. I only keep it for emergencies." The barmaid, polishing glasses, replied, "Emergencies like what, doctor?" "Heart patients don't take rowan extract." Miss Marple sipped her sherry. Her mind turning, Mrs. Clarissa Bantry entered, cheeks flushed from the cold. She made straight for Dr. Haydock. "Doctor, a word. Tommy Briggs has been caught with another spoon, and I saw you near the cauldron just before 6. What aren't you telling us?" "I was checking the temperature. Nothing more." Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hand as he set down his glass. Later in the library, a narrow building wedged between the butcher and the post office, Miss Evelyn Price sat at her desk, sketching the locket from memory. Her wastebasket overflowed with crumpled papers. Miss Marple entered quietly. "Miss Marple, I'm just cataloging." "Of course, dear. Though I wonder, did Mr. Finch ever mention a duplicate key?" He made one, for me. Said I could study the clasp, but I returned it." She opened a drawer, revealing a brass key, identical to Mrs. Bantry's. "Returned it where exactly?" Miss Price's silence was answer enough. As dusk fell, Miss Marple stood beneath the oak tree. The police tent was gone. Mr. Finch's body had been removed. Only the frozen wine stain remained, now dusted with fresh snow. She closed her eyes, reconstructing the timeline. Chapter 4. The red herring, Sunday morning in St. Mary Mead, brought a brittle sun and a congregation determined to prove that murder could not dim Christmas spirit. St. Mary's Church, Norman Tower, cracked bell, roof leaking in 3 places, was packed. Mrs. Bantry sat ramrod straight in the front pew, hymn book clutched like a shield. Dr. Haydock, unusually somber, took his place beside the font. Miss Price slipped in, late, spectacles fogged, clutching a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Miss Marple, in the 3rd pew from the back, observed it all. Her gloved fingers worried a small brass screw, the one from the display case hinge, turning it like a worry bead. The vicar's sermon on peace on earth was interrupted by a metallic clink. Every head swiveled. Young Tommy Briggs stood in the aisle, red-eared, a silver spoon sliding from his sleeve to the stone floor. "Again! That is the 3rd spoon this week. I was only holding it for Mrs. Price. She dropped it." Miss Price flushed crimson and sank lower in her seat. After the service, the vestry became an impromptu court. Inspector Craddock, summoned by an indignant verger, arrived still buttoning his overcoat. "Tommy Briggs, you will empty your pockets now." Tommy turned out. 2 more spoons, a half-eaten humbug, and a raffle ticket stub. No locket. "I never took the ruby thing. I only pinch what's useful. Spoons for me mum's collection." Mrs. Bantry folded her arms. "Useful. The church roof fund is ruined because of your light fingers, boy." Miss Marple intervened softly. "Mrs. Bantry, the spoons are regrettable, but they do not explain footprints too large for Tommy's boots. Size 6, I'd warrant, hardly size 10. She produced a tape measure from her handbag and, to Tommy's mortification, measured his foot against the flagstones. "See? The prints to the oak were made by a man or someone wearing a man's boots." Inspector Craddock rubbed his temples. "Then we searched the Briggs cottage. If the locket's there—" The search yielded nothing but dust, a jar of gooseberry jam, and Mrs. Briggs's indignation. Tommy was released with a warning and a clip round the ear from his mother. By afternoon, suspicion had ricocheted like a shuttlecock. At the village hall, now reopened for tea, Mrs. Bantry cornered Mr. Swan by the biscuit table. "I saw you, Reginald Swan, hovering near the display case at 20 to 6. Don't deny it." "I was admiring the craftsmanship. A man can look, can't he?" Dr. Haydock, pouring tea with unsteady hands, muttered. "You were lurking outside the side door, Clarissa, at 5:50. I saw you from the cauldron." "I was checking the coal delivery, honestly." Miss Price, unnoticed, slipped her brown paper parcel beneath the table. Miss Marple's eye caught the movement. Curious. Miss Price has been burning papers in the library grate, and now a parcel. Later, in the library's hush, Miss Marple found the grate still warm. Ashes yielded fragments. "Promised me the locket. Research. Betrayal." in Mr. Finch's spidery hand. Love letters, perhaps, or something more transactional. Miss Price entered, startled. "Miss Marple, I was just tidying." "Of course. Though I wonder, did Mr. Finch promise you the locket in exchange for silence?" Miss Price's hand flew to her throat. "He said it was mine to study. Then he changed his mind. Said it belonged to the village. I burned the letters to protect reputations." She produced the parcel. Inside, a cheap paste replica of the locket. "I had this made to practice the clasp mechanism. I thought if I understood it, I could prove it was a forgery, but I never took the real one." Miss Marple turned the replica over. The hinge was identical and held a tiny screw missing from the original case. "So you did have access to the mechanism and a motive to discredit Mr. Finch." Dusk settled early. Miss Marple walked the lane to Dr. Haydock's surgery, a neat red brick house with a brass plate. The waiting room was empty. The doctor was in his dispensary, back turned, measuring drops into a bottle. "Surgery hours are over, Miss Marple." "I'm not a patient, doctor. I'm curious about rowan extract. You keep a concentrated vial, you said?" He stiffened, capping the bottle. "For colic in horses, perfectly legitimate." Miss Marple's gaze fell on an open ledger. Columns of debts: bookmaker, tailor, London hotel. Beside it, a betting slip dated the day before the fete. "Mr. Finch refused you a loan, I understand, and he kept records, dangerous records." Dr. Haydock slammed the ledger shut. "Finch was a miser. The village will be better without him." Outside, snow had begun to fall in earnest, erasing footprints old and new. Miss Marple paused beneath the surgery window. A faint red smear, berry juice, marred the sill, exactly like the one at the vicarage. Chapter 5. The Mulled Wine. Monday dawned iron gray, the snow now a firm crust underfoot. At Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple's small kitchen smelled of cinnamon and suspicion. On the deal table sat the enamel mug recovered from the snowdrift, cleaned, but still bearing a faint crimson ring inside the rim. Beside it, the rowan berry in its handkerchief, the brass screw, and the paste locket. Miss Marple, apron over her wool dress, had commandeered Mrs. Archer's preserving pan. Into it went red wine, cloves, orange peel, and a cautious teaspoon of rowan syrup borrowed from the village stores. Dr. Haydock's recipe called for a dash. Let us see what too much tastes like. She stirred clockwise, then counterclockwise, watching the liquid darken. At 11 o'clock, Inspector Craddock knocked, snow on his shoulders. "Laboratory results, Miss Marple. Rowan glycoside, concentrated, enough in that mug to stop a horse, source unknown." "Try this, Inspector. 1 teaspoon of village syrup. Pleasant, yes?" Craddock sipped, nodded. "Festive, tart." She added a 2nd teaspoon. The inspector's brow creased. "Bitter now, like medicine." "Exactly. Mr. Finch's mug held the equivalent of 20 teaspoons. Someone brought their own supply." She produced the rowan berry. "Found in the coal alley. Not dropped from the cauldron. Too bright, too whole. From a pocket or a vial." Craddock unfolded a sketch. The display case hinge. Screw missing. The screw matches the paste locket Miss Price had made. She admits loosening the hinge for study, claims she tightened it again. Yet the screw was inside the case. She removed it, allowing the glass to be pushed out from within, after the lock clicked. She opened the paste locket. Inside the hinge, a tiny hollow, just large enough for a glass vial. See? A hiding place. The killer concealed the poison here, retrieved it after Mrs. Bantry locked the case, then doctored the wine. Craddock whistled. So the thief and the poisoner are the same person. Or accomplices, but let us test the wine and the cauldron. The hall was deserted, police tape sagging. The cauldron, copper dented, stood on its trestle. Miss Marple dipped a ladle. The dregs were thick, sweet, harmless. No bitterness here. The poison was added to Mr. Finch's mug after it left the cauldron. She examined the ladle, a faint red smear on the handle higher than the wine line. Someone held the ladle steady while tipping in the concentrate. A steady hand practiced. Outside the coal alley was a tunnel of white. Miss Marple followed the larger footprints to where they met the lane. Here the snow had been disturbed, a scuffle perhaps. A single glove lay half buried, gray wool monogrammed R.S. Mr. Swan's initials, yet the glove is small, lady's size. She turned it inside out. The lining was stained rust brown. Rowan concentrate seeps, careless. At the Blue Boar, Mr. Swan was in full flow, demonstrating his antique expertise with a tankard. Finch tried to palm off paste on me once. I'd know a real ruby at 20 paces. The barmaid rolled her eyes. Miss Marple slid onto a stool. Mr. Swan, you lost a glove, I believe. She placed it on the bar. Swan blanched. That's my wife's. She must have dropped it. Curious. Your wife is in Torquay until 12th night. Swan's bluster faltered. Back at the surgery, Dr. Haydock was locking up. Miss Marple intercepted him on the step. Doctor, your vial of rowan extract, may I see it? Haydock hesitated, then led her inside. The dispensary was orderly, but the ledger lay open. A fresh entry. Rowan Concorner 2 Oz, disposed. I destroyed it for safety. After the murder, how conscientious. She opened a drawer. Empty, but on the blotter, a faint red thumbprint. You handled the vial after disposing of it. To wipe it clean, perhaps. Haydock's hand trembled. At dusk, Miss Marple visited Miss Price in the library. The fire was low, ashes stirred. I've told the police everything. The replica was harmless. Yet you burned letters, and you had access to the hinge. She produced the paste locket. This held the poison, didn't it? You passed it to someone during the fete. Miss Price's eyes filled. I gave it to Dr. Haydock. He said he needed it for a demonstration. I thought nothing of it. Sound, fire crackling, a sob caught. Night fell. Miss Marple sat by her own hearth, the mug, glove, and locket arranged like pieces on a chessboard. The wine was the weapon, the locket the distraction, the glove the mistake. But whose hand wore it? Chapter 6. The locked room. Tuesday morning brought a thaw. Icicles dripped from the village hall gutters, and the snow on the lanes had turned to slush the color of dishwater. Inside the hall, Miss Marple stood alone before the display case, a magnifying glass in one hand, the brass screw in the other. The case was a cube of mahogany and glass, 30 inches on each side, raised on 4 claw feet. The lock faced outward. The hinge ran along the back. The glass front was shattered in a starburst pattern, but the frame remained intact. Locked from the outside at 6, glass broken from the inside, yet no one saw the thief emerge. She ran a gloved finger along the inner edge of the hinge. The screw hole was empty, the thread stripped. Miss Price loosened this, but she did not remove the screw. Someone else did after the case was locked. The interior smelled of velvet and old wood. The cushion bore a shallow depression where the locket had lain. Miss Marple knelt, peering beneath. A glint. She drew out a hairpin, thin steel, bent at the tip with a tiny pearl bead. Miss Price's. She wears 3 in her bun, now 2. She pocketed the pin and closed the case. Outside the coal alley was a mess of footprints. Miss Marple followed the larger set to the point where they vanished into the lane. Here the snow had melted into a puddle. Beneath it, a faint second trail, lighter, almost erased, led toward the library. The library door was ajar. Inside, Miss Price was stacking returns, her bun askew. "Yours, I believe." Miss Price paled. I lost it days ago. Inside the display case after 6 o'clock. You were inside the case, Evelyn." Miss Price sank into a chair. "I only wanted to examine the clasp up close. Mr. Finch said I could after closing. I hid when Mrs. Bantry locked up. I thought I'd slip out later, but then the lights flickered and I heard voices. I panicked. I pushed the glass. It broke outward. I climbed through and ran. And the locket? Gone already, I swear it." Miss Marple opened the returns drawer. Beneath a stack of Country Life magazines lay a folded fate program, annotated in pencil. 5:45, Finch takes wine. 5:50, hide in case. 6-hour lock. 6:10, add concentrate. 6:15, exit via hinge. The handwriting was Dr. Haydock's, neat, medical. You were the distraction. He was the killer. At the surgery, Dr. Haydock was burning papers in the dispensary grate. The air reeked of singed ledger. "Destroying evidence, Doctor." Haydock started, scattering ash. "Old prescriptions. Nothing more. Like the program? Or the betting slips?" She laid the annotated sheet on his desk. "You planned it together. Miss Price hid in the case to loosen the hinge. You passed her the vial through the coal hatch at 6:05. She added the poison to Finch's mug when he stepped outside for air. You stole the locket to frame a thief." Haydock's face crumpled. "Finch was bleeding me dry. Blackmail over debts. I only meant to make him ill, enough to miss the fate, give me time to pay, but the dose was 20 times lethal. You miscalculated." Miss Marple left him staring into the flames. At Gossington Hall, Mrs. Bantry was cataloging silver. "Jane, any news?" "The case was never locked against the thief. It was locked with the thief inside." "Miss Price?" "But the poison came from Dr. Haydock," Mrs. Bantry gasped. "The doctor? But why the locket?" "To muddy the waters. A robbery masks a murder." In the library, Miss Marple confronted Miss Price again. "You gave him the hairpin to pick the hinge from within. You thought it harmless." Miss Price wept. "He said it was a prank. To embarrass Finch. I never dreamed." Dusk. Miss Marple stood beneath the oak. The snowdrift had collapsed into a muddy hollow. She closed her eyes, reconstructing. She opened her eyes. 2 locked rooms, the case and the circle of footprints. Both illusions. She added to her list. The locket, she knew, was hidden in plain sight. Inside Haydock's hollowed medical dictionary, waiting for a fence. Chapter 7. The doctor's secret Wednesday brought a wind that scoured the village lanes, whipping snow into spirals. At Dr. Haydock's surgery, the brass plate gleamed dully under a crust of ice. Inside, the waiting room was empty, the fire unlit. Miss Marple entered without knocking, her boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum. The dispensary door stood ajar. Dr. Haydock sat at his desk, head in hands, a half-empty whiskey glass beside an open ledger. "Doctor, we must talk." Haydock looked up, eyes bloodshot. "You've come to gloat, I suppose, the great Miss Marple, unraveler of secrets." I've come for the truth. The locket is in your dictionary, isn't it? Page 342, Rowan to rubella. Haydock flinched. Hollowed books leave dust patterns, and the spine was misaligned. Haydock opened the medical dictionary. Between pages, wrapped in oilskin, lay the ruby locket, its chain coiled like a sleeping snake. Finch's insurance, he kept it to ruin me. He pushed the ledger toward her. Columns of red ink, 50, bookmaker 30, tailor 200, London hotel. Beside the totals, Finch's cramped note, Haydock, collateral locket. Blackmail. He lent you money against the locket, then threatened exposure. He was selling village relics, Ashford silver, medieval coins from the churchyard. I discovered it last Michaelmas. He said he'd ruin my practice unless I paid silence. The fate was my chance. From a drawer, Haydock produced a small brown bottle, half full, labeled Rowan concentrate. Veterinary. I only meant to sicken him. Enough to miss the raffle, give me time to fence the locket and pay the debt. Miss Price was useful. She hated Finch for refusing her research access. I gave her the paste replica to hide the vial. Haydock buried his face in his hands. I misread the label in the dark. The vial was stronger than I thought. Inspector Craddock entered, snow on his coat. Dr. Haydock, I have a warrant. The lab confirmed the Rowan glycoside matches your veterinary stock. Haydock stood slowly. Murder by miscalculation is still murder. At the police station, Miss Price waited in a side room, tear-stained. I thought it was a prank. He said Finch would be ill, miss the speech, and I'd get the locket for study. I never imagined. You provided the hiding place and the exit, accessory before the fact. Miss Price sobbed. I burned the letters to protect us both. Finch wrote he'd expose the doctor's gambling and my forgery of the replica. By evening, the village buzzed. At the Blue Boar, Mr. Swan bought rounds proclaiming vindication. Knew it wasn't me. Though I'd have bought that locket fair and square. Mrs. Bantry at the vicarage wrung her hands over tea. The church roof. We'll have to sell the silver candlesticks. Miss Marple sipped her Darjeeling. Mr. Swan will donate, I suspect. Guilt is a powerful motivator. Chapter 8. The Truth in the Tea Leaves. Thursday afternoon at Danemead Cottage was a ritual of warmth and precision. Miss Marple's sitting room smelled of Earl Grey and beeswax polish. The round table was laid for 5, lace cloth, rose-patterned cups, a plate of thinly sliced seed cake. Mrs. Clarissa Bantry arrived first, hat askew, cheeks pink from the wind. Jane, you said urgent. Is it the locket? The roof? Patience, Clarissa. Tea first. Dr. Haydock followed, escorted by Constable Polk. His wrists were free, but his eyes were ringed with defeat. Miss Evelyn Price came next, clutching her handbag like a life belt. Mr. Reginald Swan lumbered in last, booming apologies for tardiness. Traffic on the high street. Old Mrs. Dane's donkey cart, would you believe? Miss Marple poured. Milk, doctor? 1 sugar, Miss Price. Mr. Swan, 2, as always. The fire popped. Outside, the thaw had left the garden a patchwork of mud and snowdrops. Miss Marple set her cup down with a soft clink. We are here to settle accounts. The locket is safe, the poison identified, the footprints explained. Yet one thread remains tangled. She opened a small velvet pouch and let the ruby locket slide onto the cloth. It caught the firelight like a drop of blood. You found it! In Dr. Haydock's dictionary, page 342, he will confirm. Haydock nodded dully. Finch held it as collateral. I took it to silence him. Silence about your gambling debts and about the relics he was smuggling from the churchyard. Medieval coins, Ashford silver. You discovered his trade. She produced the annotated fate program. Your timeline, Doctor. 6:05, pass vial to Miss Price via coal hatch. 6:10, add concentrate to mug. 6:15, Finch collapses. 6:20, Miss Price exits through loosened hinge. Miss Price whimpered. I thought it was harmless, a joke to embarrass him. You provided the hiding place, the hairpin, the replica locket with its hollow hinge. You were the locked room. She turned to Haydock. You wore oversized boots from your surgery cupboard, walked backward to the oak, planted the single set of prints. A clever illusion. And me? Why drag me into this tea party? Because you knew the locket's value. You offered Finch £300. He refused. You spread rumors of paste to lower its price, but you never touched it. Swan shifted uncomfortably. I'm a collector, not a killer. Precisely. Your glove found in the alley was planted. Stained with Rowan to implicate you. Dr. Haydock's final misdirection. She laid the gray glove beside the locket. I panicked, thought if suspicion scattered. Miss Marple lifted the teapot, refilling each cup. Now the dose. You intended illness, not death. But the vial was veterinary strength, 20 times the human dose, a fatal error. I read the label by lantern light, the numbers blurred. Numbers blur when conscience is heavy. She produced the brown bottle. Empty now. You destroyed the rest, but the thumbprint on your blotter matches the smear on the cauldron ladle. Inspector Craddock entered quietly, notebook in hand. Dr. Haydock, you'll come with me. Miss Price. Accessory charges pending. Haydock stood. I never meant murder, only escape. Escape is a luxury denied to the dead. The room fell silent save for the fire. Mrs. Bantry dabbed her eyes. The church roof? I'll make good the deficit. £500, call it conscience money. Very wise, Mr. Swan. Guilt properly applied is an excellent adhesive. She gathered the clues. Locket, program, hairpin, glove, vial. People are like tea leaves, Clarissa. Steep them gently and the truth rises to the surface. Outside, the church clock struck 5. The sky had cleared to a pale, forgiving blue. Miss Marple watched from the window as Haydock was led away, Miss Price following with bowed head. The locket gleamed in her palm, restored but forever stained by its journey. Another pattern complete. Greed, fear, and a misread label. The village will heal. She slipped the locket into its pouch and returned it to Mrs. Bantry. Chapter 9. The revelation Friday evening, and the hall had been transformed. Fairy lights were restrung, trestles pushed back, and every chair in St. Mary Mead occupied. The mulled wine cauldron, scrubbed clean, stood center stage, like a silent witness. Miss Marple entered last, a small figure in dove-gray, knitting bag over her arm. Inspector Craddock waited beside the display case, now repaired with fresh glass. Inspector Craddock, raising his voice. Quiet, please. Miss Marple has the floor. Mrs. Bantry sat front row, hat pinned firmly. Mr. Swan loomed beside her, waistcoat straining. Miss Price, pale and clutching a handkerchief, was flanked by Constable Pauke. Dr. Haydock stood at the back, wrists cuffed, eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple placed her bag on the trestle and drew out the enamel mug, the hairpin, the annotated program, the gray glove, and finally, the ruby locket. On the night of the fete, Mr. Harold Finch was poisoned with Rowan concentrate slipped into this mug. The locket was stolen to suggest robbery. The footprints were a lie. Let me show you how. She lifted the mug. 5:45 p.m. Mr. Finch takes his wine from the cauldron. Dr. Haydock ladles it, but the poison is added later on this trestle by someone who knew Finch's habit of stepping outside for air. She set the mug down and picked up the program. Dr. Haydock's timeline. 5:50. Miss Price hides inside the display case with the paste replica. 6 Alma. Mrs. Bantry locks the case. 6:05. Haydock passes the vial through the coal hatch. Miss Price let out a small cry. I thought it was sugar syrup. You thought it was a prank. You added the dose, pushed the glass outward using the loosened hinge, and fled to the library. The hairpin, yours, picked the hinge from within. She held up the bent pin. Dr. Haydock then entered the case, smashed the glass from inside to stage a break-in, took the locket and walked backward to the oak in oversized boots. One set of prints, no return. Sound. Gasps, a chair creaking as someone shifts. Miss Marple turned to Haydock. You intended illness, not death, to buy time to pay Finch's blackmail. He held your gambling debts and evidence of his own relic smuggling. But the vial was veterinary strength, 20 times lethal. Haydock's voice cracked. I misread the label, the lantern light. The numbers blurred. She lifted the gray glove. This was planted in the alley, stained with rowan to implicate Mr. Swan. A final red herring. Swan harumphed. Damn cheek. You were innocent of murder, though not of coveting the locket. She opened the paste replica. Miss Price's forgery, the hollow hinge hid the vial. She passed it to Haydock during the fete, believing it harmless. Sound. The locket clicked open, a collective intake of breath. Inside the real locket, a curl of dark hair and a tiny folded note in Finch's hand. Haydock owes $500, collateral, this. Exposure if unpaid. Blackmail in miniature, the motive. She faced the room. Mrs. Bantry locked the case in good faith. Tommy Briggs stole spoons, not lives. Mr. Swan wanted the locket but never touched it. Miss Price enabled the plan. Dr. Haydock executed it and miscalculated fatally. Silence. Then Mrs. Bantry stood. And the church roof? Mr. Swan has pledged £500 conscience money. Swan nodded gruffly. Done. And an extra 100 for the bell tower. Sound. Scattered applause, a handkerchief blown. Inspector Craddock stepped forward. Dr. Leonard Haydock, you are charged with murder. Miss Evelyn Price, accessory before the fact. Haydock raised his head. I confess, it was meant to be escape, not execution. Miss Price wept openly. I only wanted the locket for study. I never meant harm. Sound, handcuffs ratcheting, footsteps echoing. As they were led away, Miss Marple gathered her clues into the knitting bag. People are like knitting, my dears. One dropped stitch and the whole pattern unravels. Greed, fear, and a fatal misreading. 3 stitches too many. The lantern swung once more, then steadied. Outside, the first star pricked the velvet sky. The roof will be mended by Easter, and the village will remember secrets like snow melt in the end. Chapter 10. Tea and Resolution. Saturday morning, and St. Mary Mead sparkled under a thin frost. The snow had melted into patchwork puddles that reflected a pale, forgiving sky. At Danemead Cottage, Miss Marple's sitting room was bathed in sunlight slanting through lace curtains. The round table was set for a proper tea. Scones with clotted cream, strawberry jam in a cut glass dish, and a Victoria sponge dusted with sugar like fresh snow. Mrs. Clarissa Bantry arrived first, cheeks glowing, a check fluttering in her gloved hand. Jane, Mr. Swan came through, 600 pounds. The roof will be slate, not tin. Conscience is a generous donor, Clarissa. Milk? Sound. Teapot gurgling, a spoon stirring. Mr. Reginald Swan ducked through the doorway next, hat in hand, waistcoat buttons straining. Thought I'd deliver it personally and apologize for the glove nonsense. Haydock was a fool. Fools are often clever, Mr. Swan. Sit. Try the scones, Mrs. Archer's best. Young Tommy Briggs slipped in last, cap twisted in his hands, freckles stark against nervous pallor. Miss Marple, ma'am. I brung back the spoons, all three, polished. He placed them on the table like an offering. Well done, Tommy. Honesty suits you. Jam. The ruby locket lay in its velvet pouch at Miss Marple's elbow. Returned to Mrs. Bantry for the church safe. The paste replica, now harmless, was destined for the village museum, labeled A Lesson in Deception. Mrs. Bantry buttered a scone. Dr. Haydock's trial is set for spring. Poor man. Gambling, blackmail, relics. He was in over his head. Water closes over the deepest diver, Clarissa. Miss Price will face charges, but leniency, I think. She believed it a prank. Will the library stay open? A new librarian by Easter. Miss Price's notes on the locket will be published posthumously for her reputation. Sound. Laughter. A teaspoon tapped against china. Outside, children skated on the frozen duck pond, their shouts echoing. The church bell rang the hour. Clear, unbroken, the crack temporarily mended with wire. Mr. Swan cleared his throat. I've a proposition. The fete next year, bigger, antiques fair. I'll underwrite it. Keep the locket on display, under guard. With proper locks. And no Rowan syrup in the mulled wine. Tommy giggled, then sobered. Miss, how'd you know about the boots? The backward prints? Observation, dear. The prints were too even, each heel deeper than the toe, only possible walking backward. And the surgery cupboard held size 12 galoshes, Dr. Haydock's fishing boots. She lifted her knitting, now a small red mitten. Patterns, Tommy, life is knitting. One wrong stitch and you see the flaw. Sound, needles clicking, the fire settling, tea flowed, scones vanished, and the room warmed with something deeper than the fire. Mrs. Bantry raised her cup. To Jane Marple, St. Mary Mead's guardian angel. Only an old lady who notices things, to the village, and to second chances. They drank. Sound cups set down a collective sigh. Later alone, Miss Marple stood at her window. The garden was bare, but snowdrops pushed through the mud, small, defiant. She opened her notebook for the last time. She closed the book and slipped the locket's pouch into a drawer beside a pressed violet, memory of another case, another Christmas. Another pattern complete. The village knits on. Sound, birds singing, a distant church bell, the gentle snick of the drawer closing. And so the snow-covered crime melted into legend. The church roof rose anew, the locket gleamed under glass, and St. Mary Mead returned to its gentle rhythm, wiser, warmer, and watchful. Miss Jane Marple resumed her knitting, her pale blue eyes missing nothing, waiting for the next dropped stitch in the fabric of village life. Sound, harp arpeggios rising, fading into bird song.